Good early evening. How y'all feeling? What up, though? Yeah.
Right?
Really honored to be here today, and it's a privilege and honor to share the stage with really prestigious artists that I respect and know, and I've known about this man's work probably my entire career. His work with incredible poets that I've looked up to as a young poet. And I do want to say that Naomi Long, I follow in the steps of Naomi Long Madgett, who was the poet laureate before she passed away in Detroit. And I'm honored to be the third poet laureate of Detroit. Dudley Randall was the first. So I always like to clear that up because I'm filling in big shoes, and those writers, Dudley Randall and Naomi Long Madgett, if not for them, I wouldn't be here. So I want to just kind of jump in with Nataki. It was, I'm a poet and an activist. So in 1989, I was graduating from Cody High School. It was my freshman year at Michigan State. And the Central Park Five, I mean, if I was writing a poem or we were organizing around anything, they were always a part of that, the conversation.
Yeah.
And so it was a part of my beginning as a writer. They were there. And that was long before I moved to New York City. And we were talking about the Central Park Five. So I'm curious about when you got introduced to the Central Park Five, their story, and how did it affect you, you know?
Well,
Okay, we can both take it, yeah.
Start with me with that. I lived in New York in 1989. So
Okay.
so in 1989, I was, I remember, following the events very closely, and I remember seeing interviews with Sharon Salomon on New York One on the TV. So some of the scenes that you'll actually see in the opera are scenes from that I remember and I recall.
Wow.
So of course I was really affected by it, and I was really concerned, about it. Also, of course, Donald Trump's involvement in it. He said with the advertisement saying "Support our police, bring back the death penalty." So so that was something that really concerned me. And thinking about, and now in retrospect today, thinking about that was the beginning of his political career. That's how he started, exploiting the racial animus and the racial divide for his own personal political reasons. And so. And then later when we finally, Richard Wesley wrote the libretto, and it was kind of interesting because Kevin Maynard, someone I know, gave me the libretto and asked me to recommend a composer to write the music for.
Wow.
If I could recommend somebody, I read the libretto, say, oh yeah,
I know a guy.
he wants to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, so April 19th, 1989, which is the night of the event in the park and when the boys were first falsely incarcerated. That's 2 months before I graduated from high school as well.
Wow.
And I grew up in a hyper-activist family. My father started the San Francisco State Strike, which was the longest student strike in history, and wrote the charter for the first Black Studies department.
Wow.
And so these are the kind of things that we talked about all the time in my household, or the grown folks did, and we were forced to listen.
Yeah.
And so I was very aware, from that point forward. And there were a lot of things happening. Oakland was still battling for whether or not, I was raised in Oakland, California. And the city was still battling for whether or not it wanted to be the murder capital of the world. There's a lot of stuff happening. And I think the other part about it that was sort of embedded, so all of these things are embedded in my reality, also part of why I became an artist. I remember coming up in the Bay Area and, really being embedded in the history there. Barbara Christian, the first Black woman to be tenured as professor at UC Berkeley. We hung out at her house all the time. I grew up with her kid. You know what I mean? Like, so these are the kind of folks that, Alice Walker, lent us her home in the summers, up in Boonville, so we could act like we had vacation money.
Right, yeah.
But I remember feeling like being a statistic was normative. People thought I was supposed to be a statistic, even though I grew up in a working class educated family. My mother likes to say that's middle class, but we were working class educated with working class money, but middle class ideas, I guess. Yeah. But I remember these ideas around having to remind people that I grew up in an educated household, generations of that, a legacy of that, right? And still the people sort of looking at me as if I was somehow some sort of strange anomaly because I wasn't a statistic, even though all of my girlfriends weren't statistics in whatever way, Right. And I remember this case and feeling like one of the things that solidified it, when the convictions came, and feeling like if they decide that this is who you are, I was 17, 18, if they just decide this is how it's going to be, and there's no way out. So that case actually had a real big effect on me, and my activism all the way through. I went to an HBCU for undergrad, so all the way through, So it's when I first got the call from Portland Opera, I don't even think I waited for Suzanne to finish the sentence. She said, we're doing this opera, Central Park 5. Yes, let's do it. When? What are the dates? Let's go, because it gives me an opportunity to sort of unpack some of that stuff that I had. You bury that deep in your experience chest, and it starts to inform the way that you do your work.
Yeah, I mean, for some Chris Collins, in fact, the people who know me, their first response when they saw me here was, "What are you doing here?" Jazz saxophonist, but there's a lot of reasons for it. I guess, in '89, I'm embarrassed to say I was well out of high school at that point, but I was a musician, so going back and forth to New York was a big deal. And when this came about, I was just talking to some friends at the table. There was so much, especially initially, there was so much darkness around the story of abuse. I was shocked by the age of the people involved.
Right.
We're talking about children here, certainly compared to anything, and certainly the age I was. But it was having a businessman, pay to advertise a statement about it that turns out later to be a leader, in quotes maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of, the thing it makes me think about though here today, and as a musician, I think this is something that's always interested me that I'd like to get from you guys, from both of you, is I was talking about the first time I heard classical Italian opera played by an Italian orchestra and an Italian group. The thing that struck me is how free they were with it. There was improvisation within the performance. I'd never heard that before, but it ingrained the idea of that's their cultural music. They own this stuff, man, and so they take it different places. The same way jazz is respected around the world for the way Americans own it. And on the other side of that is getting, studying jazz history as a young person and learning about, Tremonisha and early, attempts to combine, Americana, American themes, American music, American culture in the world of dramatic opera. And that just like jazz, opera is very much a living, breathing art form. It always has been, it seems to me. Many people don't think of even jazz that way. They think of it as a historic piece, which it isn't. It was always intended to tackle contemporary issues and storylines and contemporary musical elements, and it's a modern, forward-thinking art form. This is it represents an amazing moment, and I'm curious to have you speak a little bit to this evolution of opera in general, its living, breathing nature, but in particular, the evolution of the American opera form, with the American stories and the issues and the music. Please.
Yeah, well, that's what's been my motivation. I think since 10th grade, I remember I was actually living in Italy in 10th grade, and it was very, very interesting because I had been a classical pianist, since I was, 6 years old or something, and then my parents, someone gave my father a record, Thelonious Monk record, Monk in Italy, so I learned the record. I started learning the record, and I started to improvise and play. And at the same time, I was in Italy, and I had this wonderful teacher who had started a philosophy class, and he had come to Italy to be a priest, and then he fell in love with a woman, so he realized the priesthood wasn't for him.
Not a bad
So,
reason.
so he came. He was teaching English in the class. He started a philosophy class, and it was basically existentialism 101. So I read Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, and there was all the stuff about music. You know, I read Birth of Tragedy, and I read Either Or, and all this stuff. And I began to think, Nietzsche's describing this thing of the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and all this thing. And I began to think, well, that's not really German music. That's what American music can be, because we can bring the improvised and the composed together. We can bring the European and the African together. We can bring all these things together to create a new form, maybe a new form of opera. So that's where the big idea came to me, that to create try to begin to create an opera that is built on American themes, American culture. My first idea was to do Invisible Man as an opera. That was when I first thought of. And
When you gonna do that one?
I love to do it. I can't get the rights though. That's the problem. I thought about that, and I actually met Ralph Ellison later. I met Ralph Ellison, and he, of course, was so he was such an inspiration, and was so involved and immersed in the music too. He was a trumpet player. He grew up in Oklahoma, and all that stuff. So I think that realizing that our story, our politics, all of that is so immersed in music. That music tells our story, from the blues, from everything that comes from that from the ring shouts, everything else, all the way to now. You know, so that when I did X, when I had a chance to do X, finally, thought about, well, I could tell that story through music. My brother said, well, if you read the autobiography, all these references to music in it. So you can say, oh, well, 1940s, what's going on in 1940? Okay, bebop's emerging. You have you have Louis Jordan and the Timpani Fives. You have beginning of R&B stuff. You know, have all this stuff. And then the 1960s, John Coltrane, Miles. Or Cecil Taylor. You know, so the emergence of the avant-garde in jazz is being parallel to Malcolm's evolution as a leader. And Malcolm was always around the music, so that brought that home. And so when I think of the Central Park Five, it was so interesting to me because 1989, Do the Right Thing, that premiered. This was a time, a very explosive time in terms of race relations. You know, if you think of the impact of that film, actually the white people who were protesting, calling for the death penalty for the Five, they've had signs saying "Do the Right Thing." Oh wow. They were marching with signs saying "Do the right thing," which is so ironic, you know, because you see so in some sense, the reaction to the Five reminded me of Danny Aiello's character in "Do the Right Thing." You know, going to smash that beatbox. We're going to take that boombox and smash it. You know, and I think that was it, because they were this irrational fear of hip hop and of hip hop becoming mainstream, And if we look at the music, for example, the expression wilding, where they say they were wilding in the park, that comes from a song. Yeah, Wild Thing. Yeah. They were singing Wild Thing. Yeah. So, of course, white people hear it and say, oh, Wilding.
Yeah.
Don't take TH. Well, my wife gives me grief for not saying TH too. So, but anyway, and then, you know, Back on the Block, it's 1989. Yeah. So that's also when Quincy Jones produced that, and bring hip hop and jazz together, et cetera. So I began to think about, you know, all that cultural moment that it represented too, that moment, that critical moment in our history, and so it felt like a natural thing to do. Felt natural to embrace the story, figure out ways of also looking at Harlem. I grew up. I was in Harlem until I was 4. You know, so Harlem has always been my nostalgic home. You know, so I think about Harlem. My brother lives in Harlem now. So when I say Harlem is Duke Ellington. Yeah. Yes. You know, Harlem is Fats Waller. Harlem is all that incredible history of music. You know, from Sugar Hill to Harlem, et cetera. You know, so I began to think about. So when I had in the opera, I said Harlem. Okay, that's from the Harlem from Ellington's Harlem.
Yeah.
You know, that third. You know,
Right.
that starts to be. I did my little homage to it. I in Harlem. You know, so it's all about. I'm paying homage to what one of the great composers of the 20th century, Duke Ellington. So, you know, and so I find that so bringing that musical background, music to the story, and the whole spectrum of black music to the story, and then also finding ways to find within opera as a dramatic form, creating a drama with it. You know, so a lot of one of the great challenges was doing all the interrogation scenes in Central Park 5, because I began to think about. So I had to think about maybe this idea of rhythm, the rhythm propelling it. This energy. It's almost like I thought about it was like a machine, a demonic machine that's going bim, 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 on, and it's motivating the racism. It's behind all that. So it's thinking about the root causes and the emotional source where that energy comes from. You know, that's something I would try to capture in the music.
You did capture that in the music.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I want to just feed off the thing you said about us, because right now we're in we're having a deep cultural moment now in this country. We have the NEA, maybe going away forever or something, and the threat on artists to silence themselves. So they're scared that festivals won't bring them, or they won't get grants based on them being anti-genocide or whatever. So I'm curious, just to speak to this moment politically and the things that are happening. When I asked a couple people about Central Park 5, the opera, and they were like, oh. And so I want you to speak to the oh, because I tried to watch Ava's doc, and I couldn't. So I'm a mother of black sons, and it's hard. Though I don't know, I haven't seen it. So the interrogation scenes, my heart couldn't take this dramatic interpretation of what happened to these young men's lives. I know Youssef personally. Like I'm wondering what do we do, and what do you do as black artists now, and creatives, to find joy in storytelling when it's such a hard, traumatic thing that we're dealing with that hits us, right into our own household.
Yeah. Do you mind? I'll take
Go
that
ahead.
one. I think it's important that we give in to the complexity of the full story, right? And part of healing is sort of accepting that there's a full story, right? And knowing that all parts of the story are valid. And all parts of the story represent people's actual lived experience, and so we have to make room for it. I did something that people don't do in opera, because I'm a theater maker by trade. Is I had a table read, because my thing was like, I know that the opera singers can sit behind the sound, right, and sort of let that be something that's happening, that comes through them out into the world, and not really have an attachment to what the words are really saying. So I was like, we're gonna go through this thing word for word, and we're all gonna sit here and listen to the story, and we're all gonna have audience around what the story is really trying to say. Okay. And what that did was it gave the performers the conviction that what they were actually carrying was greater than themselves, right? They all had to come to that because they had to be a part of that conversation. And so I think you can tell a really tough story with an immense amount of love, and with deep respect and humility, and with a desire to be clear and truthful about what the story holds. Because I think if we can do that, then we can do this really amazing thing that, performing arts is capable of, is penetrating your spirit and getting into your empathy well, and giving you a way to draw some of that up, and maybe activating some of that in the world. And that's what the world really needs right now, is a little bit of that activation. But at the table, some of the performers were like, we don't always like to do this kind of stuff because, and they called it this, and there's part of me that was like, I wanted to flip the table over. They said it was trauma porn.
Or trauma art. I feel.
No, they said it was trauma porn.
Wow.
And so I had to kind of get into this with them, talking about a machine, right? Eventually, we got into a space where we could talk about it because I had to help them remove the idea of the story as pornographic from the container that is sharing the story.
Yeah.
So what makes something pornographic is the exploitation of it. But the thing itself is truthful and necessary. And I have to kind of break it down and be like, I've never heard anybody talk about the Diary of Anne Frank, the movie, the play, the opera, everybody, all the dances, all of it, like it was trauma porn. I've never heard anybody say that about Schindler's List, right? We don't talk about the stories about what happened in Ireland as if they were pornographic, right? So why are we black people sitting around this table talking about it's pornographic? That's just a way to make sure that you don't want to tell your own stories. And we deserve to have access to our stories and to see ourselves, right? But also we deserve to honor the story of these young men, right? These boys, they were babies. And we also can't forget that, just like you said, there are people in this city right now, people all over the country, people all over the world who are having this experience.
Yes.
And so if you don't unearth it and let it be seen and known and experienced and shared, then how are we gonna keep supporting each other and these stories? We only gonna watch their stories and we're not gonna watch our stories? I wrote a whole article about it because I was like, these babies said trauma porn, and I just didn't have it in my spirit was like, we can't talk about enslavement or harm or what's happened to us or stories. And then on the other side, they're trying to erase the stories.
Yes.
And working in these institutions that got mad at DEI in the first place, and they were like, we don't want you to preach to the choir. And I was like, what in the world is wrong with us? Let's give space for the story and know there's joy in exoneration.
Yeah, come on.
There's joy in that. And there's joy in knowing that at some point justice does come back around,
Yes.
right? Doesn't always come when we want it to, like God sometimes. But it does come when it needs to. And it does come with a bit of retribution to make sure that we understand, sometimes we have to be the canaries in a coal mine. This is that time again. The artists have to be in this again.
Yes.
We have to be the ones to live in this story again. And maybe there will be a day when we look at these stories and we go, like, oh, the histories like they do with Shakespeare. Oh, these histories are so compelling about what happened to people back in the day. And so you keep telling them until it's like that, until they're no longer reflective of our time.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, bravo.
And the reality is, when you look at Trump and look at what's happening today, they're trying to erase us.
Yes.
They're trying to erase our history. They're actively, when they're going to the African American Museum, and it's this part of the Smithsonian, the attitude they have toward our history, trying to really change and the gains we've made in terms of understanding our past. I mean, I remember I wanted to do an opera about the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Which is an event that was buried.
It's buried. It's such
Literally,
an important event.
where the people were.
Yeah.
And they in Oklahoma, they weren't allowed to talk about it.
Yes.
They're not allowed to teach it. They're not allowed to talk about it in schools.
Wow.
I mean, but I think that's part of our history. That's part of what makes America what it is. America, I mean, now we have this anniversary of the United States, right? Yeah. And they want to make all this pseudo-positive, completely positive image of America, when we know that there was the idea there was equality for all was a lie. Right. It was a lie, at least until the Civil War and until until the 1960s. Right. So I think that because it's been a constant struggle. I mean, race has been the issue that it's been the struggle and what has compromised the quote unquote American values from the beginning. That's right. And that's something that always has to be addressed. We always have to think about, and we're not going to let people like Trump bury the story. Bury the story. We're not allowing him to erase our history.
That's right. That's right.
and this is not to be to say, okay, we're dwelling on trauma or anything. I really have no patience with people when they say, oh, we have to just create stories of joy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we're not a narcotic. we're not a drug.
Thank you.
I mean, if you want to make art that's a drug, fine, you go do it. But that's not what I want to do, or Nataki wants to do. We want to create art that tells something about us, that's cathartic.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of coming through what these five and identifying what those five young men had to endure and to come out on the other side. You know, now we have Yusef Salaam is a city councilman in New York. Okay?
Yeah.
So I think so this idea, it's a story of hope. It's also a story of vindication. It's a story of with their exoneration, et cetera. So it's something that we can look at as a message of hope for what we have to face in the future. And we can't capitulate to the Trumpers and the MAGA people who want to suppress us and suppress our history. We have to, and this is part of being an activist, part of being an artist today. I think it's an obligation for an artist to be an activist today because we have to speak up for everyone. We have to make art that speaks to everyone. We want to make sure that people understand where we come from, what we've had to endure, and where we're going in the future.
Absolutely.
Yep. Bravo.
I have one more thing to say about it. So there's also this other thing, because I saw Ava DuVernay's movie When They See Us.
Was you able to watch the whole thing? I couldn't.
I watched the whole thing twice.
Yeah, I couldn't.
I
tried.
Yeah,
I
mean,
twice.
So I have some friends who couldn't watch 12 Years a Slave. You have to meet it where you are, right?
Yeah.
And I think, but I want to name the difference, right? Because I also saw Ken Burns' documentary about it, and there's a lot of carriers for this story, right? It's in the music of the time. Hip hop, said some things about this too in their stories and poems, and but the music has something different that it does. It's a different kind of carrier because the music doesn't care about your identity or background or if you have sons or not. Like, music doesn't care, right? So you can deal with this machine of the interrogation with this sort of syncopated beat of it, and you can feel that syncopated beat, and you can also close your eyes and listen to it. And the music has a way of getting into your cells, and your cells, they develop an intrinsic understanding about what it is you're trying to say. And so as a different kind of carrier, we all listen to all kinds of music, Shabuzi, we listen to Beyonce, in her old days and now in her country music days. We listen to all the music, and that's because music has this way, they say this is a cliche, but it's not. Music has this universal way of penetrating the spirit.
Yes.
And so as a carrier for this story, it's unbelievable how deep it goes and how much you carry home with you. And so the image is notwithstanding. Like, we're not, we don't show that kind of traumatic interrogation in the way that the movie can do because the camera lingers in those ways. It's a different kind of expression of it. It still holds the truth of the moment, but it carries it differently because these singers actually have to reach down, to the bottom of their feet, all the way down into the core of the earth and pull up these sounds, in this space of telling what's happening, what they're experiencing in their bodies, and tell the truth at the same time. And so I also want to just sort of give in to the idea that if you can't go see the film, you can hang out with an opera.
With opera,
if you're one of those people that really just can't witness, that's okay because the opera carries it different. And so you should go to all the different ways you can get to a story, and know that there's an offering for you, just like there's a poem that speaks to you, and there's that poem in a hip hop song might be something else, right? But it still will speak to you.
Yeah.
You said it in a really interesting way once. I think it was maybe it was on American Black Journal. I can't remember which interview it was, but this idea that the attacks on art and what is art, right? And that's what we're talking about here. We were having a conversation that I often have that, our art, God bless the funders, God bless the Gilbert family and everybody that steps up to make these things happen, because art is not, in the end, a money-making corporate process, right? The only art forms that survive are the ones that are valued by the culture in which they exist. If they stop valuing it, it goes away. It can't survive without that. And what you're talking about now, the emotions of this and how it affects an individual, certainly those of us who are old enough to remember the incident, the emotions that were upon everyone at that point through how the media treated it and how the police were acting, and some of this was revelations to a lot of us because we weren't in the middle of it. But then how those emotions come back, maybe differently or revisited when the exonerations happened, and then now with you guys putting this story in a new context, introducing it to people who maybe don't even know about it. And again, experiencing for the first time the emotional content, which can be heavy, as you said. But you said it really well in the way of the music. As a musician, I'm going to reference this, but you said the music carries the emotion of the story. And any musician, any artist, you realize that is the beauty of art. It is sometimes, it can be very personal because it's not as specific sometimes. So people can have their own interpretation from their own perspective. And I often tell young musicians when they're protesting, yes, protest, but you're an artist too. Express it in ways that maybe open the door to other perspectives and invite even a larger crowd. But I love that saying, that the music carries the emotion of that. Can you just go a little further on that? Because that's a really deep thought.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I think I grew up in a household, all those albums that you mentioned, my dad still has those albums, and I just feel like I just grew up in a world in which I didn't have limited access. I was taught that I was supposed to access. And music is one of those things. I mean, I remember even having arguments with my mother about whether or not a black girl should be listening to Duran Duran. But
of course
it's okay.
But
Duran was the bomb.
Exactly. But I think we I don't know how to get in there with it, but because it's one of those things that being able to articulate it is so deeply embedded in my own lived experience and my understanding of the world, But I do know it does that because I go home singing this, right? And for months after both the Portland production, oh my God, the songs would just appear, it still stays in you, because it's not even, it's like a not an earworm, it's like a cell worm or something. It's sort of in there with you. It attaches itself to other sounds that it references other things that you've experienced. It reminds you of, the first ballet class you took and the last African dance class you took. Like it just does all of those things in the body. And it's singular to your own experience. It's not like, I'm not gonna have your experience. I'm gonna have my experience. And what I do, on my side of things is I kind of just make sure that the mise en scène, the room can tell the story, right? So that if you decide to open your eyes, and not just listen, you also can see something that supports what you're feeling and hearing. That's what the room does. And I give myself license to be able to sometimes go, we're just gonna turn on the light. And then this person's just gonna sing in this beautiful light. Because I don't want to get in the way of what this song is doing to me. Wow. I actually don't want to see anything. I just want to listen. I want to give everybody license to listen.
So Amir, you're so inspiring. I love hearing you, just listening to you talk. But because you speak like someone, it's very blessed to know that the world belongs to you too. And that's something I've taught my son, and something Amiri Baraka, you always say to me, Jessica, the world belongs to you too. And so I'm curious about you embracing opera. You come from a theater background. When did opera find you, or when did you find opera? And talk about your collaboration with this amazing composer and how, what is that like? And because I'm a librettist as well, you know, young librettist, but I'm in the work too and working on my own ideas of how I want to see myself on opera stages. So I would love to talk about your collaboration.
So I went to Cal Arts.
Shout out to Cal Arts.
Yeah, right. Shout out to Cal Arts. To kind of hone my directing skills. I knew at that point that that's what I really wanted to focus on, is being a director. And a composer who was in the music program, Anne LeBaron, invited me to stage her opera called Wet. Therese Splaboda was the librettist on it. The opera actually came apart in the process. We did perform it at Red Cat in Los Angeles, but that was my first time. I'm actually glad that I did that first. This climate-focused opera about a big flood that comes and takes over, and it has a couple of really amazing and penetrating arias. I think the deepest conversation I remember, though, is the librettist and the composer arguing about whether or not it's okay to sing the word kids, because the composer was so angry about the sound of the word, And
Oh my goodness.
but that's my introduction. I also did a couple of experimental operas.
Yeah.
But my first time, connecting with Anthony was shortly after I got the call from Portland Opera. And a lot of our conversation at the beginning was like, I saw the recording at Long Beach, and I was like, so what happened that you really liked, and what did you want in it that you didn't get to have, right? Remember that?
Yep.
Yeah, and then the rest is kind of history. You say what it is.
Yeah. I think when you're talking about getting into opera, when I went to Yale, I took a class in it was supposed to be 19th century music, and but the teacher, Robert Bailey, was a Wagner scholar, so he taught the whole 19th century music as leading up to Wagner, and Wagner for almost all of it, and then Strauss at the end, So it was very, very weird. I was upset about it at first because I'm a pianist, and what happened to Chopin and Brahms and Beethoven and all that stuff. So anyway, but he was so wrapped up. So I started, as a reaction, I started writing parodies of it. Like I started doing science fiction suites, and so I did this concert based on The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula K. Le Guin novel, and with my band, and I had a whole page of leitmotifs. How they have in the Wagner operas. They have the leitmotif. This motif here, or this means this. Means that. So I did that. So that was sort of how I was getting into it musically, and but I think when my brother was doing El Haj Malik, he was doing a play, and he was playing Malcolm X in the play, and so I went to the performance, and he came backstage and he said, oh man, you should do a musical about Malcolm X, and I said, I don't think it's a musical. And then I said, what are you going to have, the dancing fruit of Islam? What is that going to be? No, I don't think so. I said, he's a tragic hero. And now I've been doing Siegfried and all that stuff. But I think, no, he's just that. Malcolm is a definition of the tragic hero. Doing that story, that should be done as an opera, So, and that's how it's sort of the genesis of it. And to me, doing opera is really liberating in a funny way, because what it is that at a certain level, it's not a realistic medium, because people are singing, people are doing it. So this idea of this literal depiction, I have to have someone who looks exactly like Malcolm X, or I have to have someone who looks exactly like Yusef Salaam, or so. We're free to that, because in a way we go to the next step of saying, okay, what do they feel? And imagining what they were feeling. What their circumstance, the identification process, how you identify with the people in the story, and and the emotion of it, the underlying emotion. That's something that opera can do, and also opera can also illuminate kind of the underlying forces, You know, what are the forces behind this?
Yes.
What is it, in a way that, because it's almost like the ex machina part of music, the music thing, that the driving force in music, that is, to me, is also parallels the forces that are at play in our society, in our culture, and that's something you can kind of look at and feel in the music in an opera, and that's something I strive for.
You know, there's one photo of Malcolm X I have on the wall of my office. It's a black and white. It's about this wide, and he's speaking casually in a diner. It's clearly a diner, and he's speaking casually. And only because I had a friend who was in the band back then. He is surrounded. One whole half of the diner is full of the Count Basie Orchestra. They had done a gig, and he went to the gig, and he's hanging out, and then he's preaching in the middle of this. I mean, speaking of, it's inseparable. Those were so that decision was amazing. I wanted to ask you. We're talking about emotion, and of course, it's such an honor. Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, not to mention Anthony Davis, but it's incredible to be on stage with you. But the composers in film or dramatic elements, the importance of how the process of how the composer decides. Maybe it's their character themes, maybe their emotional themes, environmental themes, things that give us cues as to where we're moving. And we're moving into joy, we're moving into darkness, foreboding. But talk a little bit about that process, if you would, as a composer from that dramatic side. But also, our last conversation was when you presented X here in Detroit. To give us some sense of the score itself, I understand it's expanded for Detroit because of the great Detroit Opera Orchestra. But back with X, it was the orchestra with a combo in the middle. There was this blending of compositional elements and improvisation, which to me is the freedom and the discipline of that is really important to a lot of stories. Can you give us some sense of the score, the orchestration, and then your process in capturing and carrying the emotions of the story?
Oh, right, great. Well, thank you. Well, of course, in the orchestra in Detroit, there are improvised. Mike is one great example of it. Plays piano in it as well as playing piano for in support of the singers, etc. But I always look at this kind of came from my original conception of opera from 10th grade, because I wanted to bring the improviser into opera. The idea that every performance is unique, and the improviser can bring something that's spontaneous, and also bring that tradition, that heritage, the African diasporic traditions into the opera. And to hear the improvised music, and music also that's founded in the blues, founded in R&B, founded in musical styles. I mean, when you hear Central Park 5, you'll hear there's a blues in a blues in it, and I refer to Black and Tan Fantasy from Duke Ellington because in the lyrics Richard Wesley's librettist wrote this lyric, Harlem, a black and tan fantasy. I said, oh God.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
Yeah.
I have to put don't. I put that's actually underneath one of the solos, Tricky Sam's solo in Black and Tan Fantasy comes in. So for me it's also that playful thing, because music is the joy of music is the joy of play, playing with things. Like to me, playing with the past, playing with what I remember from Duke Ellington and the lessons I learned from him, lessons I learned from Charles Mingus, or lessons also lessons I learned from Alban Berg too, or Schoenberg, et cetera. They're all in it. So it's like a way of to me conversing with that. So that's part of it. But then to reach into the emotion is I remember doing X. It was very interesting for me because I think the main emotion I had at first when I was doing X was rage. Rage. It's like this fire, this rage that just goes. I it was, and I identified with him so much because it's what everyone goes through. The obstacles you go through, what you have to go through, and then feeling that, but that as a motivating force. But then then many years later, when I'm doing Central Park 5, I was able to. I tapped into all kinds of emotions. I mean, X had love and all the kind of Elvis aria and all that stuff. But I think that you want to tap into those moments in the opera, like Sharon Shabaz's aria. When I wrote that, I had to find something. I wanted to find something that spoke to the heart right away. Boom! It's going to be tonal. It's going to speak, and it's going to be direct. A direct expression. So to finding that the emotion, and to me, it's also the ways in which I use tonality. Sometimes I use tonal elements. I might have really dissonant things, and then all of a sudden, something opens up because it's a way of opening the heart up, opening up to the emotion of the moment. It's like not. I mean, I think one of my models in that is actually Berg. I studied Wozzeck a lot, and I was so fascinated, like when Wozzeck is about to commit suicide, walking, all of a sudden it's D minor. What? Yeah. After all his music, all of a sudden he took a piano piece that he had written years before, adapted to the orchestra, and it's like a totally like Brahms or something. So I said, okay, but that showed me something. It showed me something about how you can find light in darkness. Like how music can also, if you let it, if you don't be didactic about music and be open to it, you can allow the music to express this whole range of things, and not be so restricted in a style. So to me, sometimes when people talk about genre and styles, and I remember, is this jazz or is this? Some of that is the legacy of segregation. Really, because they segregated the record bins the way they segregated our life. So to me, it's always interesting to open those things up. Like when I did X book, one of the most powerful things for me was to pretend that none of those things exist. There's no genre, none of it. You just do what's into the story, what fits it, and that you don't second guess. Yeah. And I think that's me. It's very exciting because it's like realizing your freedom, which is actually the most dangerous thing you could do. But realizing your freedom is amazing.
I think it's the most courageous thing you can do, not the most dangerous. And courage is the key to great art. I firmly believe that.
What do you all both hope that the audience feels or takes away from this work, in Detroit in particular?
That life is complex. It's filled with all kinds of experiences, that life is joyful as well as really difficult, and that it's okay to experience and witness what it means to move through something. Because the elders in my life would say the only way out is through. You have to go through that whole thing and get to the other side. And then baby, you're gonna be okay. So that you actually have to have that experience. I think the other thing is this music is for us. I'm so like when I got the call that Anthony wanted my production to move to Detroit, I was just so elated because this opera is so Black. Yeah. And we did it in Portland.
Can you tell everybody in Detroit that it's so Black? It's important.
It has all the classical elements. It sounds like opera, right? Yeah. But it's so Black, and it's so necessary. In a space, in a city that is predominantly Black. Yeah. For people to know that it's for us. It's everybody's welcome. But it's for us, and I'm reminded of that every single night. That music says to me, "Oh yeah, we meant for you to be in this room. We're happy all these other people are here, but we really wanted you to come."